The birth of the system. From human to persona, let's start with something so commonplace, you likely never think about it. The birth certificate. A piece of paper with a seal, a number, a date, and a signature. You have one, your parents have one, and their parents had one. Without it, you are a nobody to the system. No passport, no bank account, no job, not even a SIM card. We've been conditioned to believe this is natural, that it's always been this way. A simple record of a biological fact. But here is the first hard question. What if that isn't true? The world before the number for thousands of years, civilizations managed millions of people without birth certificates. The Roman Empire. None. Byzantium. None. Medieval Europe. None. The British Empire at its peak. None. People were born, lived, traded, fought, paid taxes, married, and died without a single state document, recording the moment of their arrival as a numbered event. Then, around the turn of the 20th century, everything changed. Not gradually, and not in just one country, but almost simultaneously. In a span of 20 to 30 years, nearly every industrial nation arrived at the same idea. Every person must be registered at birth with a number in a state registry. It was as if someone flipped a switch. Before this, the world wasn't a chaotic dark age. There were censuses, taxes, courts, and armies. Record-keeping existed, but it didn't track you as an individual. It tracked the household, the family, the community, or the parish. The state knew how much land you had, how many cattle you owned, and how many men could carry a sword. It didn't need your first breath recorded on paper. The shift in logic: if vast empires managed populations without individual birth registration, what fundamentally changed in the early 1900s? Why did the state suddenly need to know about every person? Not when they became a taxpayer or an adult, but the very moment they appeared. The official answer is care, statistics, and healthcare. It sounds humane and convincing, but there's a problem. To achieve those goals, you don't need to build a system that becomes the foundation of a person's entire legal life. You don't need to turn a medical certificate into the primary key to existence. If refusal to register effectively means civil death, is it really just about statistics? The architecture of control. To understand this pivot, look at the mechanics. In ancient Rome, censuses happened every 5 years, but they recorded the household, domus, as an economic unit. In medieval Europe, the church kept records of baptisms and marriages, but these were parish books, not state registries. You didn't carry these records with you to work or travel. Your existence was validated by your relationships with your family and neighbors. The start of the 20th century, states stopped relying on communities. They wanted a centralized registry. They needed the human as an atomic unit, detached from family and community, fixed at the point of birth, at a timeline of coincidences. USA example. The push for standardized birth registration in the U.S. began around 1902 through the Census Bureau. By 1933, every state was on board. Look at what else happened in those same 30 years. 1913, creation of the Federal Reserve. 1913, federal income tax. 1917, mass conscription for World War I, requiring proof of age. 1935, Social Security. Impossible to manage without a verified birth date. This wasn't a collection of random facts, it was a single process. The birth certificate became the root document from which all other identities grow. The legal mask. Here is the detail that makes people uncomfortable. The legal distinction between a human and a person. Term nature definition: human biological, a living, breathing being. A fact of nature. Person legal, a category of law, from Latin persona, or mask. An entity with rights/duties in the eyes of the law. Persons can be corporations, trusts, or government agencies. The state doesn't interact with the living human. It interacts with the legal persona created by the birth certificate. The certificate creates a subject that the state can contract with, tax, and draft. You don't sign this document. You aren't even a conscious participant when it's created. The decision is made for you, creating a mask that acts on the legal stage, while the living human stands behind the scenes. If the birth certificate doesn't just describe you, but actually constitutes your legal existence, then your entire life is built upon a foundation designed for management, predictability, and the planning of human resources decades in advance. It looks different now. This is no longer a voluntary entry into a relationship with a state. It is participation by default. And so, we must ask the following question. If this persona exists, what specific functions does it perform? Not in words, but at the level of mechanisms. This is where things emerge that are difficult to dismiss. Let's look at what this legal persona allows the system to do in practice, step by step, without abstractions, because this is where theory turns into mechanics. As soon as a birth record appears, the state gains a point of attachment, not to a family or a place, but to a specific unit. One, individual taxation. In the past, taxes were levied on houses, land, crafts, or trade. Now, you are taxed individually. In the U.S., the Social Security number, which is effectively assigned at the hospital, grows directly out of birth registration. This isn't a random coincidence. It's a conveyor belt. The number exists not for convenience, but for precise administration, to know exactly when and for whom to come. This is a fundamental shift. The tax system no longer asks whose son you are or which parish you belong to. It is interested in the persona in the registry, a string of data, an identifier. It is this identifier that links income, accounts, fines, debts, and obligations into a single chain. 2. Conscription. The mass armies of the 20th century were impossible without precise knowledge of age. Not an estimate, not a verbal claim, but a legally verified fact. World War I proved this harshly. Millions of people had to be mobilized quickly, and scattered church records were unfit for the task. The birth certificate solved this problem once and for all. 3. Social systems. Pensions, benefits, education, medicine. These sound like social goods, and in many ways they are. However, these systems have entry requirements. You must be recognized not as a human being in general, but as a persona with verified parameters. Age, status, citizenship. All of this is rooted in that same initial record. 4. Tracking and legibility. Where are you born? What is your name? What documents are linked to you? Marriages, divorces, children. Everything latches onto the original record. The birth certificate becomes the anchor to which your entire biography is stitched. The insight, before the state can give you anything. It must make you readable, legible, and understandable to the system. This legibility begins not when you choose something, but when a form is filled out for you. This is not necessarily evil logic, but it is total logic. It encompasses everyone without exception. Once you are in, you cannot leave without serious consequences. This is where administration stops looking like simple paperwork. If your legal persona is a node to which taxes, debts, and future obligations are tied, a question arises that was long considered improper. What if this persona performs one more function? The ledger of life. If you look from above, you see a closed system. The birth certificate is the opening line in a chain. Birth links to marriage. Marriage links to tax status. Tax status links to labor. Labor links to pension contributions. Pension links to medicine. Death neatly closes the loop. This is no longer record-keeping for the sake of order. It is a ledger, a book of life, in a bookkeeping sense, not a poetic one. Without this chain, you cannot own property, work officially, inherit, or even die correctly. In the eyes of the system, the state does not interact with your memories or your feelings. It interacts with this sequence of records, the parallel twin. Most people feel this intuitively. Your life runs in parallel. There is you, living, contradictory, and changing. And then there's your twin, a sequence of records, numbers, and statuses. It is this twin that matters when it comes to law, money, and power. The most unsettling part is that this system was never discussed. It wasn't chosen or voted on in a referendum. It simply became a fact. Most people only discover its boundaries when they hit an error in the record or lose a document. Suddenly, they find that correcting the paper is harder than correcting reality. The persona as an asset. If the legal persona is a node for future income and taxes, can it be viewed as an asset? This is how financial systems think. Let's be careful. This isn't about people being sold or having price tags. It's about the cold financial logic of large systems. Any state that borrows money must back its obligations. When bonds are issued, investors care about the state's predicted ability to repay debt. That debt is repaid from one source, future taxes, and the economic activity of the population. To borrow massively and long term, you must be able to calculate the future precisely, broken down by age and generation. In the early 20th century, states gained the tool to do this. Universal registration from birth. Notice the timing. As national debts and central banks grew, states began thinking decades ahead. They needed to know how many taxpayers they would have in 40 years. The legal persona is the perfect data source. You cannot collateralize a living human, but you can collateralize a legal persona. It has a start date, a status, and a modaliable productivity. The Great Silence. If this was such a massive shift, why was there no resistance? Usually, when the state changes how it recognizes human existence, there are debates, scandals, and philosophical arguments. But here, the conversation was narrowed down to technicalities, forms, percentages, and deadlines. It was treated as an administrative measure. No philosophy, no ethics, no consent. The architects of the system seemingly decided it was not a subject for public discussion. It was built not as a choice, but as infrastructure. And infrastructure is rarely discussed. It is simply used.